Yeah, one of the biggest bits of news really at the moment in the conflict between Israel and Gaza is the ceasefire proposal that I think pretty much everybody had agreed to. We covered it last week. It was a sign of hope. Appears to have been rolling around for a few weeks now. There's been a bit of a blockage, I think, from Hamas' point of view. What's your take on where we got to?
Yeah, it was. I must admit, I'm still a bit sceptical because if we recall that the President Biden had put a proposal on the table, he'd run it through UN Security Council. They had approved it, and America hadn't vetoed it, which meant that Israel was now tied to it. So if Hamas had agreed to it, it would have been imposed, and that put Prime Minister Netanyahu in a really difficult position. One of his war cabinet resigned. He's now dissolved the war cabinet as a result, and he's tap dancing his way, trying to stay in power at the moment, whilst also trying to continue with the Hamas operation in Rafah. So he's trying to wipe out the last bit of Hamas, even though the international community has said stop. There's a rising tide of concern about the humanitarian aid because some of the crossings aid crossings have been closed. The US had built that pontoon. That got wrecked a second time, and that's a way being repaired. So the humanitarian situation has been sort of spiraling a little bit out of control. I think one of the reasons that, but you'd probably be a better place to say, but it felt like the Palestinian question hadn't been answered. But didn't Anthony Blinken have a few words to say about it this week as well?
Yeah, Anthony Blinken, Secretary of State, stood up and gave an update. I look at these things, I listen. I need to hear it from four other sources before I sort of not just believe it, but understand the richness, because the politics of this are just absolutely furious. But basically said the peace proposal, the ceasefire proposal, had been agreed pretty much everywhere. We were waiting for Hamas. They took a couple of weeks to come back. The proposal that was on the table was pretty much exactly the same as the one that Hamas had agreed to back in May the 6th, whatever the date was. They came back with several objections, which for the time being has sort of killed it. And a couple of them looks like it's going to be quite difficult to overcome and sort of pass the initiative in a way back to Israel, because, on the face of it, it looked like they were either going to agree or, as you said, actually had no choice but to agree. So it looks like the thing has stalled a bit.
Yeah, and again, until they actually solve the actual underlying question, which, Hamas has said, if you solve the Palestinian question, we'll put our arms down tomorrow. Whether you believe them or not is another matter. But that's what's been going on. The other bit of me that's always a bit suspicious here is Netanyahu clearly is doing a difficult job, but also clinging to power a bit at the moment. And I don't think it's a coincidence that over the last couple of weeks, particularly the last few days, we've seen a massive increase in Hezbollah attacks in the north of Israel. Part of that is that Hezbollah have always said we stand in support of Hamas, and if Hamas are encountering difficulties on the battlefield in Rafah, then launching more attacks is another way of diverting Israel. But if you look at it from Israel's perspective, they might want to deal with the Hezbollah situation. It's been rumbling for several years. And the danger is they use this as a catalyst for dealing with that situation. It's a really febrile situation at the moment.
Yeah. And I think the other thing you said is it rather stupidly, from a tactical point of view, if you're Iran and you are actually controlling proxy wars with the three H's, as we've said before, then this is quite a dangerous moment, because outwardly valid and humane reason why the Gaza conflict needs to be finished, that nobody can disagree with anywhere in the world. Hezbollah situation is completely different. There isn't a Gaza in Lebanon. There's just Hezbollah, terrorist organisation, continual skirmishes over the last 25, 30 years. And every now and again it blows up and lots of missiles are fired. What that would give the West, or that would give Israel and therefore the West the opportunity to say is, well, this war against Hamas is not about Gaza. This is about the land of Israel and this axis of evil that's trying to do it, which would completely shift the focus and actually give the West an opportunity to say, okay, we struggle schizophrenically with supporting the war against Gaza, but we definitely do not struggle with supporting the war against Hezbollah.
Yeah, and I think that it goes back into the history of Hezbollah, doesn't it? I think, but yeah, taking your point, I do think it's wrong to use frivolous words, but I I never believe in coincidences, and it is interesting how has Israel precipitated the tension on the northern border. Part of the reason that Hezbollah say they're attacking is because they lost one of their senior commanders recently, so they've upped the ante. But actually, is all part of this. Israel, Netanyahu, they've been around some years now. They're canny. And if they can distract attention from the ongoing operation in Rafah, and as you say, make this more about the survival of the Israeli state rather than wiping out Hamas, is that just an effort to change the news agenda?
Well, it seems to me every war has got politics in it, whether we like it or not. In the last big skirmish with Hezbollah, which I think is called the last Lebanon war, between Hezbollah and Israel, something like 4,000 missiles were fired in a month. That's a pretty big distraction coming from the other side. So I think it's who might win the politics here might be the issue.
Well, yeah, I try and start with these things about the military side. So Hezbollah, various reports, 20,000, 100,000 troops, depending on who you believe. They've got some tanks, they've got small arms, a bit of artillery, rockets, but they're not a modern military capability, not like Israel. Israel can draw on over 1/3 people, and it's got a 21st century military. So the war you refer to, even though there are a lot of independent analysts that say that it was a draw, all that Hezbollah won, what they mean is Hezbollah survived. They weren't able to beat Israel, but Lebanon paid a huge price for that war. And if you look where we are today, Hezbollah has shifted from being purely a militant organization to having a foothold in the politics in Lebanon.
Yeah.
I think they only hold about 13 seats of the 100-odd seats that are there. But the population seems increasingly unhappy with Hezbollah because the quality of living has been going down in Lebanon. The last thing anybody in Lebanon wants to see is another war, because they know that a lot of Lebanon will be leveled if that's the case. So Hezbollah has sort of been described as a state within a state, funded by Iran, equipped by Iran, trained by Iran, provoking on an agenda that's linked to Iran, but from Lebanon soil. That is a very difficult mix, and I'd be fascinated to see Hassan Nasrallah, who's the head of the Hezbollah. I think he'll be walking an interesting tightrope here. I'm not entirely sure he'll want a war with Israel, because the danger is that's the straw on the camel's back that breaks the back of Hezbollah being welcomed in Lebanon. And at the moment, they use Lebanon as a sort of an outpost from which they exert influence. I'm being benevolent around the world.